On a clear afternoon in August 2022, the price of electricity in California fell to -$30 per megawatt hour. For several hours, grid operators were effectively paying consumers to take power off their hands. The cause wasn't a malfunction or a market glitch. It was the sun. Solar panels across the state were generating so much electricity that the grid, at that specific moment, had more than it could possibly use. This is the dream of a renewable future, made real clean, abundant, and so cheap it becomes free. Yet, that same evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, those same grid operators executed a quiet, billion-dollar contradiction. They fired up a fleet of natural gas plants, and across the American West, in Europe, and in Asia, they did something even more telling. They called upon coal-fired power stations, some decades old, to ramp up production. The most advanced energy grid on the planet, awash in free solar power by day, was being propped up at night by the oldest, dirtiest source of electricity humanity has ever industrialized. The world has built enough solar and wind capacity to theoretically power nations. But the grid doesn't run on theory. It runs on something far more difficult to generate: certainty. This is the Energy Historian, uncovering the hidden systems that power civilization. We measure the energy transition in megawatts and gigawatts, the staggering, headline-grabbing capacity of new solar farms and wind installations. Globally, we've added over a terawatt of renewable capacity in the last decade. The numbers suggest a revolution already won, but the grid doesn't measure capacity. It measures something more immediate: megawatt hours delivered right now, in this instant, to match demand that is climbing, falling, and shifting by the second. A solar farm's gigawatt rating is a promise of potential. The grid needs a promise kept every single second. And between those two concepts, potential and real-time delivery, lies the entire, unresolved architecture of the modern electricity system. It is an architecture with a ghost in its machine. That ghost is called inertia. It's not a fuel, it's not a battery, it's a physical property of the grid itself, born from spinning metal. In a traditional power plant, whether coal, gas, or nuclear, electricity is generated by massive turbines weighing hundreds of tons, spinning in perfect synchronization at 3,600 revolutions per minute. These spinning masses possess kinetic energy. They are flywheels on a continental scale. When a large appliance turns on, or a transmission line fails, that sudden change in demand creates a tiny dip in the grid's frequency. Those spinning turbines instantly give up a little of their kinetic energy to fill the gap, buying the system precious seconds to respond. This is inertia. It is the shock absorber that keeps the lights on between one heartbeat and the next. Solar panels and wind turbines create no inertia. They are silent, static converters. A photovoltaic panel has no spinning mass. A wind turbine's rotor is disconnected from the grid by electronics. Its spinning does not directly stabilize the system. They produce pristine electrons, but they produce them silently, without the gravitational anchor of all that rotating steel. As more of these inverter-based resources replace spinning turbines, the grid loses its innate stability. It becomes a high-wire act without a safety net. Think of it like replacing a heavy, stable sailing ship with a fleet of nimble speedboats. The speedboats are faster and more efficient, but in a storm, they lack the mass to hold course. The entire system becomes twitchy, vulnerable to cascading collapse from a single disturbance. So the grid operator faces a paradox. By day, they have too much clean power. By night, they have a desperate need for stability. Their solution is to pay old coal plants not just for the electricity they produce, but for the simple act of existing, for being on standby, spinning their turbines, providing that essential inertia. In Germany, this is called a capacity market. In Australia, it's a system security service. In Texas, it's an emergency contract. The language varies, but the transaction is the same. We will pay you to keep your dirty, obsolete plant ready to spin, because your spinning metal is the only thing keeping our clean, modern grid from falling over. This is the first hidden truth. The transition isn't just about building new energy. It's about subsidizing the old energy to stay, because the old energy provides a product we forgot to name: grid stability. We built a system that depends on a physical property we never had to buy before. Now we buy it from the very industry we're trying to replace. But the plot thickens. There is a second, even more fundamental product that renewables lack, and coal provides on demand. It's called dispatchability. A coal pile is a battery. It is energy density, sitting in a heap, waiting to be converted into electricity whenever you need it. The operator can dial a coal plant up or down based on a forecast or a sudden crisis. The sun and wind are not dispatchable. They are subject to nature's schedule, not the grid's. This creates a brutal economic trap known as the duck curve. The name comes from the shape of the net demand chart in places like California. In the middle of the day, solar floods the system, crushing demand for other power sources and driving prices to zero or below. That's the duck's belly. Then, as the sun sets, solar generation plummets just as people return home, turning on lights, appliances, and air conditioning. Demand surges vertically, the duck's neck. For a few critical hours, the grid needs an enormous amount of power, fast. Only a few sources can ramp up that quickly. Natural gas turbines, hydroelectric dams, and yes, coal plants. Batteries are entering this space, but their scale is still a rounding error compared to the need. The entire economic model for any power plant is shattered if it can only operate profitably for a few peak hours each evening. No private company will build a new gas or coal plant under those conditions. So what survives? The old, fully paid-off coal plants. Their construction debts are decades gone. Their only costs are fuel and maintenance. They can afford to sit idle for 20 hours a day, then spring to life for the 4-hour crisis at sunset, because those 4 hours of power are sold at astronomical prices. The renewables boom didn't kill coal. It murdered the economic case for building new, more efficient coal or gas plants. It instead created a perverse incentive to keep the oldest, dirtiest, and least efficient plants alive as emergency relief pitchers. The transition is being backstopped by the industrial relics it was meant to retire. Now we arrive at the core, counterintuitive answer to our title's question. Coal persists not in spite of the renewable energy boom, but because of it. The very success of intermittent solar and wind has made the grid more fragile and more dependent on the stability services that only thermal plants, coal, gas, nuclear can provide at scale. We built a skyscraper of clean energy on a foundation of dirty spinning inertia we assumed would always be there. As we remove that foundation floor by floor, we discover the entire structure starts to sway. The backup system has become the essential load-bearing wall. This realization forces a brutal accounting. The true cost of renewable energy isn't just the solar panel or the wind turbine. It is the solar panel plus the gigawatt-scale battery, plus the long-distance transmission line, plus the payments to the coal plant we keep on life support. We've been counting the cost of the new while ignoring the stranded cost of the old system we still desperately need. The financial markets have spotted this flaw. Investment in new renewable projects is stalling in many regions, not because the technology isn't ready, but because the grid to absorb it is not. The bottleneck has shifted from the factory to the system. One material now decides how fast everything changes. That material is lithium, or cobalt, or copper, the critical minerals for batteries and wires. The scale is almost incomprehensible. To store just 6 hours of electricity for the United States, you would need battery capacity that consumes more than 10 times the world's current annual lithium production. The transmission lines needed to move wind power from the plains to the cities require millions of tons of copper. These are not policy timelines. They are mining timelines, measured in decades for new projects to come online. In the interim, the grid must run on what it has. And what it has, in most of the world, is coal. This is not a story of failure. It is a story of complexity. The 20th century grid was a masterpiece of centralized, predictable engineering. The 21st century grid is becoming a decentralized, weather-dependent network. The bridge between them is the most complex machine humanity has ever attempted to rebuild while it's still running. Every time we switch off a coal plant, we don't just remove a source of pollution. We remove a source of stability, a source of dispatchable power, and a warehouse of fuel stored on site. Replacing that requires not one technology, but an entire symphony of them, all in perfect harmony. So when you see a headline about record renewable energy production, know that it tells only half the story. The other half is written in the control rooms, where engineers stare at frequency graphs, buying inertia by the ton from spinning turbines attached to boilers fired by coal. The energy transition is not a switch. It is a precarious, high-stakes relay race. And the old runner, for now, cannot drop the baton. If this changed how you see the system, subscribe. The hidden infrastructure is always there. Now you know where to look.